Hey there, how's it going? So in this video then I'm going to address the issue of how to deal with foreign languages while you are traveling. So I've been to 33 countries so far in the course of my travels around the world for more than 2 decades, and most of those countries have been countries in which English was not their native language. And so you get to a foreign country, they speak Spanish there, or Hindi, or French, or whatever, and you want to go to a restaurant, you want to go to a store and buy something, you need to get a bus to your next destination, you arrive at your hotel and need to check in. So how do you deal with the fact that they might not speak the same language that you do? Now I'm going to throw out a fun fact here, except that it's not really that fun, but I came across an article recently on the subject of how many countries has England invaded in the course of its conquests around the world. England, of course, has colonized many countries around the world, and so this was a very fascinating article, and the number is pretty staggering. So the number of countries that England at one time or another invaded around the world is all of them except for 22. So there are 196 recognized countries at this time on planet Earth, and so that means that England invaded 174 countries in the course of its world adventures and conquests, and so that is not very fun history there, but it's the reality of what happened. And so that is your answer, basically, when it comes to dealing with foreign languages when you're traveling around the world, which is that English is the world language, essentially, and your best way to be able to get around the world as a tourist, as a traveler, is to speak English. So fortunately, if you are watching this video, then you almost certainly do speak English, and so that is your best bet when it comes to being able to travel and do what you need to do in the course of your adventures. Now, obviously, not everybody around the world does speak English, but the reality is that almost anywhere that you go in the world, then many people will speak English, especially if it is one of the 174 countries that was at one time dominated, colonized, invaded by England. And so if you go to India, for example, then India was taken over by England, and this is essentially what actually unified India, because prior to this, then India was basically, depending on the time period, different states with different rulers, and there were different languages within India. There are still, I think, 18 completely separate languages of India. And so after the English left, after World War II, then India became a sovereign nation of these different, basically different kingdoms that had been squashed together that had the unifying factor of Hinduism. But other than that, then they had different languages, different cultures. And so English actually became the common language of India in terms of business and basically how somebody from the south would communicate with somebody from the north, because in the north primarily they speak Hindi, and then in the south almost every state has a different language, and so somebody from the north is not very likely to speak Kannada or Tamil from the south, but English became the unifying language to an extent. It doesn't mean that everybody in India speaks English by any means. Many do not, but when it comes to India, Belize, they speak English. Many different countries around the world, then the people might speak a local language and then also speak English. But in addition to that, then even if it is a country that doesn't have a prominent English presence now, they may have been invaded or in some way influenced by England sometime in the past, but it didn't take over their culture to that extent that everybody speaks English. However, if you are somebody who is in the tourist industry, you have a hostel or a hotel or a restaurant that caters to tourists, especially tourists from outside of that country, then English has become the world language. And so the primary language that they are going to want to learn, in addition to their native language, will very likely be English. Of course, there are exceptions. There are countries that were colonized by France or Holland, Spain, etc. But in the course of my travels, then I have experienced that English is very prevalent. Now, that does not mean that everyone you come in contact with in the course of your travels is going to speak English by any means. Certain countries, then English is spoken more commonly than in others. In many places around the world, then you will not find a person who speaks English for a while, or maybe they just speak a little bit. And so you can't just go anywhere, walk around, walk into any store and just start talking English and expect that they are going to be able to answer your questions. And so then that gets to the issue of how do you deal with a situation in which somebody doesn't speak English, or whatever other language you might know. Say you know Spanish, then that's going to go a long ways in South America and other Spanish-speaking regions. But invariably, you are going to come across people who do not speak a language that you speak, and then how do you deal with that situation? And there's no real like magic trick or secret answer or anything really to add, other than it is going to be a situation in which you have to bumble your way through it in order to communicate whatever it is you need to communicate. And so you might use sign language of sorts, not official sign language, but just basically miming things out, pointing in certain directions, indicating you want to eat, or you need to go to the airport, a plane flying off the runway there. There are many things that you can just kind of get the point across, especially because it will probably be fairly basic stuff that you're trying to explain. Where's the hotel? Where's the restaurant? Where are the bathrooms? And so you can get through situations communicating with people who don't speak a word of whatever language you speak, one way or another. It may be awkward, challenging, etc., but that is just part of traveling. Now, additionally, then it is a good idea to learn some of a language in the country that you're going to, if possible. I have learned a little bit of Spanish. I took a year of Spanish in high school, and so I learned some of the basics and then picked up a bit more in the course of traveling in Spanish-speaking countries. Not enough to carry on a conversation at all, but enough that it definitely does make a big, helpful difference. And then because I've been to India 6 times, then I've learned Hindi, pretty similar to my Spanish, maybe 60, 70, 80 words in total, something like that. But enough that it does help, not only in terms of communicating with somebody, but also getting the point across to somebody that may try to rip you off, charge a higher price for things, that you've been there before, you know some of the language, and thus you are probably going to know the prices of things. And so you get into a taxi and you speak a little bit of Hindi there in India, or Spanish, then they might be less inclined to try to take you for a ride that you don't want to be taken on. But if you have the time and the will, then it is definitely a good idea to try to learn a language, especially one such as Spanish that is spoken so widely, or Hindi or Chinese if you're planning to go to China. That is not an easy task, of course, but it's certainly something to consider if you plan to do a lot of traveling. But the reality is, if you speak English, then you can get your way around the world just fine. And so that is pretty much the short answer there, is learn English, and you will be able to travel around the world one way or another. So hope that helps answer the question of dealing with foreign languages. Take it easy.